The proposed changes for version 9.2.0 of Dead by Daylight are so disconnected from the reality of the game's balance that it seriously defies any reasonable logic, which is a massive shame because this new update will be bringing a seriously cool killer to the game. But I fear her release will be overshadowed by the controversy of these anti-tunneling and anti-slugging updates. The suggested changes are not balance changes, rather they are a definitive handicap to one side. The backlash from these proposed changes and the current PTB has been so severe and universal that even in the time it has taken me to write this script, they have already announced that they will be pushing back these changes for a future PTB. Yet we still need to discuss them, especially in the wider context of behaviour's mismanagement of this game. Precious development time has been wasted on this failed update, and further time will now be spent tweaking it and refining it. Dev time that could have been used for more pressing issues, like bugs and killer reworks that are desperately needed. The very fact that these changes made it to a PTB stage is in of itself very concerning, as anyone with any knowledge of the game would see that these changes are way too heavy-handed and disrupt the balance of the game. Yet it is no surprise, because the developers are seemingly clueless about the nature of their own game, and are enabled by the rampant toxic positivity that is present within this community. This week, as I've been discussing it and criticising these changes, I've encountered wave after wave of DBD's community on Twitter who are cheering these changes on. Or you have other content creators or influencers who continue to glaze behaviour and ignore these glaring issues. They astroturf the issues at play here. And in addition, you have those content creators and influencers within this space who take the stance of reframing genuine criticism coming from myself and others as whining or doom posting, trying to stifle real feedback. And it is this type of toxic positivity that has allowed behaviour to get away with the bare minimum for years, and it's not good enough. This video will essentially be discussing 9.2.0 as a jumping off point to discuss the wider community in Dead by Daylight and how portions of this community have allowed behaviour to get away with doing the absolute bare minimum for far too long, either by stifling real criticism through toxic positivity or by ignoring the issues altogether. Now, do not get me wrong, some of the biggest voices in the community always let their voices be heard and criticise things when they're bad.
A bunch of times. It's kind of like the 2v8 effect, where they only show you people that are not close to dying. And I don't like it. I don't like it. Like, why? Like, I don't want to go for you now, man. Like, I'm just giving you chances that you shouldn't be getting.
Big creators like Otstarva, Hens, Scott Jund, Pixelbush and Mr. Headache are all speaking loud and clear about the blatant issues within this patch, and it's great to see. Yet this is often drowned out by other voices within the community who, instead of criticising the blatant issues that are coming soon, choose this critical moment to instead gush over the new cosmetics in the patch, whilst choosing to ignore the glaring elephant in the room. This is in addition to the slew of Survivor mains who are gleefully celebrating that one half of this entire game is getting gutted. And yet, it is to this seemingly small, vocal and toxic group of players that behaviour is listening to and catering to the most. Such is the current state of Dead by Daylight, which is meant to be undergoing its own Project Health this year, and instead precious development time and resources are wasted on unnecessary and unwanted changes like this, while bugs and cheaters utterly infest the game, such as maggots infest a bloated, overripe corpse. Meanwhile, promised updates and reworks to killers who badly need it have been left in the gutter for months, and these killers will now be even further behind the meta, as their stripped back and incomplete powers will struggle to keep up with the massive advantages that survivors will now have if 9.2.0 goes through as is. But how did we get here? How did a lore guy from Elden Ring get so annoyed that I stopped reading item descriptions to make this very video? Now, as I've said, they've already announced that they're going to be pushing back these changes because the outcry has been so overwhelming that they've already announced this before the PTB's even done, because it's so obvious to anyone who actually plays this game that these changes are bad, and thank goodness they're going back to the drawing board. And yet, despite the fact they have listened to feedback and delayed these changes, the very fact that it got to this stage, that they spent development time on making these changes, that internally they reviewed it, and they thought that this was balanced and healthy for the game, is extremely concerning. It suggests to me that the developers, BHVR Interactive, are seriously out of touch with their own game, and I am genuinely concerned for the direction the game is heading in the future. There are two main things I want to discuss and critique in this video. First is how Project Health, the quality of life update, has mainly been a failure this year. And the second is about 9.2.0, and ultimately on how this is a result of behaviour being enabled by certain parts of the community. Let us not waste any more time, and let us get into it. I'm sure most people know the history of Project Health or the quality of life update at this stage, but let's talk about it just to set the scene. For years, players have been crying out for a pause in new content updates, which happen roughly every 3 months, so that time can be spent on actually fixing the core issues of the game, as bugs keep adding up every time a new killer or survivor is introduced. Thankfully, the community's prayers were answered at the beginning of 2025, when the devs announced their quality of life update back in February. And this came about largely as the result of two major events that pushed them into doing this. The first was the release of the Houndmaster, a killer who was a cool idea on paper, but released in an utterly unacceptable state for a paid piece of content. To this day, the Houndmaster is a bit of a buggy chore to play, and I quite frankly believe that she will remain this way. Soon after this pretty poor content drop, BHVR took to their community and asked them to vote for Steam's Labour of Love Award for Dead by Daylight. To put it mildly, this was not met with positivity, as many thought this was a pretty rich ask given their most recent release, and the years of general neglect towards existing bugs, issues, and the cheater epidemic. And so, after being thoroughly criticised by their community, including by some of their biggest content creators, BHVR announced a massive project, the Quality of Life Update, a project spanning the whole of 2025 that would be split into 2 phases. This project promised to fix the underlying issues of the game, and more encouraging was that BHVR was even willing to delay the next content, and thus delay a new injection of cash, to allow themselves time to make these changes, and that was met with a lot of support. And I would say phase 1 of this project was actually very successful. A lot of these changes were quality of life, and they genuinely make the game more enjoyable and better in a lot of ways. The bulk blood point spending, the abandon system, and the new spawn system being received very well. Earlier this year, I was the happiest with the game I'd ever been, and that was in a large part to these changes that just made the experience a little tighter. I also do like the new quest system. The lack of lore was its main issue, but that is coming soon, and so I've got no real issues there. However, a dark cloud loomed on the horizon, as some in the community were already looking to phase 2, which promised anti-tunnel and anti-slugging reduction. These changes were coming at a time when many felt that the game was sliding into a new survivor-sided meta, and this was the result of various things that had compounded over time. Mainly the gradual increase of healing-related perks and items making their way into the mainstream meta, alongside increased hook times, and the overall strength of toolboxes and gen-related builds. These facets were compounded with the release of the Walking Dead chapter, where a few changes and additions pushed the needle further in the direction of Survivor. There were some new powerful Survivor perks. There was a nerf to Franklin's Demise, one of the only tools that a killer could use to fight back against powerful items. It also marked the introduction of a powerful new item, the Fog Vial, an unlimited use item that was not only incredibly irritating due to how often it could be activated by a group that had 4 of them, but it also represented an accessibility issue. The patch also brought some unwelcome changes to the clown, and of course, a plethora of new bugs. All of these issues were raised loudly and clearly to the developers during the PTB, where we are to, yes, thank you behaviour, test things and feed them back, and yet, the vast majority of these issues, bugs and all, made it to live. And we welcome back to this tendency of the developers to ignore PTB feedback. With the releases of Tokyo Ghoul, Springtrap, and then The Walking Dead, in 2025, bug after bug compounded. The devs would release bug fix patches following each release, but as Hens so aptly put it, the pace of which they were doing it could not keep up with the emergence of new bugs. The scale of the game's bugs can be seen in this eye-watering Twitter thread by Alrincan, and the sheer volume of these issues is simply unacceptable. What other live service PvP game has this many active bugs and for this amount of time? Why is this acceptable? Why is this ignored by large swathes of the community, who instead spend their time gushing over new cosmetics instead of calling on the developers to fix their game? From my personal experience, some of these bugs have interfered with my enjoyment of the game, mainly the collision around objects in maps seeming to expand above them beyond their visual aesthetic, and it's made me stop playing Xenomorph and Deathslinger, who feel miserable to play at the moment, given their projectile often seems to hit mid-air and bounce off. Additionally, I mainly play Nurse, and she herself has a lot of bugs that have also been around for quite a long time. Campbell's Last Breath, an add-on that allows you to instantly double blink essentially, doesn't work half the time. You fully charge your blink and then it doesn't go off. One of her best and most fun add-ons is completely unusable. Well, at least not reliable. Secondly, her blinks are sometimes refunded. So despite the fact you perfectly blink onto a survivor, you are pushed back. It's incredibly frustrating and disorientating. Albeit, Nurse is a very strong killer anyway, so I highly doubt she's going to be on the priority list. But this is just my personal experience from playing a small collection of killers, and there's such a massive amount of killers who are so badly mangled by the bugs and behaviour are doing nothing about it. Following the Walking Dead update, it became clear that a massive bug sweep was not ever going to be a part of their Project Health, and yet it was the most badly needed aspect of fixing the game. Behaviour were just not listening to us, or at least that's how it felt. But soon, this inability to absorb player feedback would come back to bite them, and bite them badly. As a promotion for the flagging and divisive Walking Dead update, Behaviour were due to host a really exciting livestream with Chandler Riggs, aka Carl from Walking Dead. And he was going to do a livestream where he would play with some of the biggest content creators. Chandler seems like a lovely and charismatic guy, and so this would absolutely be a massive win for Behaviour if it went to plan. Sadly, they are their own worst enemy, and this livestream would be a disaster of their own making. DDoSing has been an issue in the community for ages, and it's been reported by the community and content creators, and it's never been properly fixed. The latest iteration of this issue was mainly for streamers, who when they were hosting custom games, the DDoSers would join a spectator slot in order to gain the IP of the server, and then they'd be able to DDoS it. Behaviour has been made aware of this, and content creators have had to learn to live with it essentially, because Behaviour aren't fixing it. And they do it by filling out all the spectator slots so no one can join a game, thus the DDoSers can't get their IP. Well, we all know what happened next. Ots, Chandler, Mish, Burb and Ghost Arcade were DDoSed repeatedly, meaning they couldn't play a single game. The group did a great job in this stressful situation. Not only did they keep it light and breezy, but they actually offered some feedback to Behaviour live on how they could fix this now, so they could go ahead with the livestream. But both Otstarver and Chandler Riggs themselves were rudely disregarded by the Behaviour team on site. The stream thus ended in humiliation as not a single full game was played, and Behaviour were rightly taken to task for this massive fumble, an easily preventable disaster that they themselves cooked up. Of course, following this DDoSing, the spectator slot exploit was immediately fixed, showing that they were always capable, they just didn't bother listening. After this public humiliation, Behaviour again showed some contrition, and announced a health update to their health update, whilst apologising for ignoring our feedback for months. Honestly, there's not much of note here. We don't know if they're going to keep these promises to fix the most priority killers. And if the story ended here, we'd be in a state of wait and see. But of course, 9.2.0 has arrived, and a massive shakeup has come with it. But before we move on to that, the main subject of this video, I do want to highlight another issue that The Walking Dead highlighted to me. And that's the laziness of some of the past couple of licenses. It's so easy to look back on The Walking Dead as the embarrassing patch with the fog vials full of bugs, and it'll be remembered mainly for that stream. And yet, you shouldn't forget that this was The Walking Dead, a titan of an IP, one of the most popular shows that has ever graced the silver screen. And it was an absolute nothing burger, a forgettable content drop, a mid-chapter with 2 survivors and a tile. This should have been a massive event, a massive content drop, and yet Behaviour seem to have this lazy template for how they do licenses now. They never go big anymore, and I think the new map is just embarrassing, considering this is meant to represent The Walking Dead. It's just the Withering Isle with a new, broken, out-of-place tile in the centre. And realising that this is obviously what they've done, they've just dumped a tiny tile that they spent some time on into a copy-pasted map, the Withering Isle, it made me look back at the FNAF chapter as well. And I had this underlying feeling of disappointment. I had awaited Springtrap in DBD for years because I'm actually a big fan of the original 6 FNAF games. And in terms of flair and aesthetic design, the killer absolutely delivers and even exceeds my expectations. Of course, at Behaviour, we've got nothing but praise for the design team who always absolutely smash it out of the park. I find his power a little boring, but I think in overall, the Springtrap killer itself is really great. So what's my disappointment with this chapter? And I realise what it is. It's the map. This map is the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, a small main building slapped onto the same Withering Isle backdrop. I wanted a full and detailed, intricate indoor map that represented Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria really well, because part of the personality of the original FNAF games are the locations, and I'm afraid to say that DBD did not translate this well, for me at least. And this made me realise that Behaviour have started to template their new maps thanks to the Realm system. It was the same with Vecna's map. Instead of them making full, unique, individualised maps, they basically design a single building and then slap it onto a copy-pasted template with the same aesthetics and the same assets. It is lazy and so disappointing. Some of these IPs deserve way better. FNAF has been wanted by the community for years. And while Springtrap himself isn't a failure, I think it's fair to say that the FNAF chapter is a bit underwhelming. And that's if we're lucky enough to get a map at all, because of course we have quality licenses like Tokyo Ghoul, which would have an amazing aesthetic, coming out with no map. A massive missed opportunity. But of course, we now know why there's been no effort put into a new Walking Dead map. Because instead they have spent God knows how long on this new 9.2.0 rework that we will now dig into. Having played the PTB a fair amount, I do appreciate some elements of this update more than I thought I would, and I understand the intent behind it. But to be clear, overall these changes are as game-changing as we predicted when we first saw the notes, and that's not in a good way. Now, as I mentioned earlier, since even writing this script before I got to finish it, the devs have already announced that they are going to push back these changes. They won't be going live in this update, and we'll see them again in a new form, in a new PTB. But that doesn't mean that they are cancelled and they're scrapping them. It's clear from the wording here that they're going to rethink it and bring it back in a new form. So we still need to discuss what they were proposing. And we need to discuss it because the development team thought this change was right. They thought it was the right direction for the game. They thought it would balance the game more and make it more fun. And that is deeply concerning, that Behaviour thinks that these changes, the tunneling and slugging reduction changes, are the best direction for the game. Hugely concerning and out of touch. These changes are so bad that the community has convinced them to push back the changes within about 4 days of the PTB starting. How can we as players immediately tell that these are bad on paper and the developers don't? We understood they were bad when we saw them written down. We understood that they were bad after a few hours of testing on the PTB. So why for the months and perhaps longer that these changes were being developed and tested internally, did no one internally raise that these might be problematic changes, that these might be bad for the game? I'm shocked that they came to the PTB as they were, and that they needed our feedback to tell them that these are bad. It really is a bit of a self-report on how little the developers understand the flow and high level of their own game. Yeah, I still think we need to unpack this. They will be returning in some form, and it is critical in understanding what behaviour thinks is right for the game and how they're so wrong about that. We of course do not know what dictates the decisions that behaviour takes. However, it's clear from the language used in this update preview that they are primarily concerned with the survivor experience, with no mention of how it plays to feel killer at any stage in this preview and the frustrations that they may feel. I appreciate that they are going off total stats for the game, and I have no doubt that at the lower level or new players to the game, low MMR games will overwhelmingly result in the killer absolutely steamrolling the survivor team who maybe don't know what's going on. The fact that these suggested changes, the anti-tunneling and anti-slugging reduction changes, would have skewed the balance of the game in a bad way was tacitly admitted by the devs themselves in these very patch notes, as it says that all of these changes could be disabled in custom games. This is clearly a consideration for comp level DBD, and thus is an admission that these changes would not lend themselves well to a balanced and competitive environment. I'm not opposed to all these changes. I definitely want to see mean-spirited, hard tunneling at 5 gens go and be severely punished. But the punishments that killer get are beyond punitive and will always apply whether you are winning or losing. A killer should not be punished for trying to bring back a losing game. Losing the ability to regress gens or giving survivors a massive 25% generator boost when you're at 1 gen and 4 hooks is utterly ludicrous. It baffles me that no one at Behaviour considered such scenarios given they're so common, and we're happy to blanket punish killers for completing their main objective, killing. This is not to mention the various other benefits that survivors get beyond the punishments that killers can get. These protections and benefits that survivors get go way beyond my highest expectations of what Behaviour would implement to further protect survivors. The 30 seconds of endurance, haste and elusive, whilst information is hidden from the killer. And on top of that, many meta killer perks have been nerfed, like Eruption and Pain Resonance, to account for the situational and minimal benefits that killers get for spreading out their hooks. Benefits that do not help trap or weak killers, who lack mobility or who want to rely on a web style of gameplay. The haste, the barbecue and chili, and the increased damage is more likely to benefit a blight, even if the numbers are slightly reduced for him, than it is a hag, who gets barbecue and chili on a survivor who is miles away on the other side of the map, way outside of her web where she has all her traps. It's just not going to benefit her at all. These changes are massively overtuned, and I could keep going on and on about each individual change, pick up each bullet point, but that's not the purpose of this video, and there are plenty of videos like that. I would direct you to the likes of Mr. Headache and True Talent, who have done videos picking apart these changes and offering sensible tweaks and alternatives. But in short, the benefits that killers get from spreading out their hook is just not enough against what the survivors get. And they will slightly help strong killers who already don't need it, and it'll do basically nothing for C-tier killers, who will be utterly buried by the massive advantage that the survivors are getting. Oh, and some maps are getting more pallet density, so that's nice. I don't want to make this an us versus them. I have a lot of respect for skilled survivors, more than I do for skilled killers, because to become a good survivor, it genuinely takes a lot of time and game knowledge. Knowledge of every killer's power, knowledge of every map and its loops, how to loop, how to hold checkpoints, and how to chain loops together. All of this takes a huge amount of skill, and I've been absolutely cooked by survivors who have this level of skill. And I have nothing but respect for survivors who are able to beat killers in this way. And I would say that in most cases, becoming a good survivor to this level is harder than becoming a good killer and takes more time. However, I'm going to say something that's potentially controversial. I think there are a lot of survivors who have played this game a lot who aren't actually good at it despite the hours they have, but they think they are and have massive egos as a result. I think they are carried by strong exhaustion perks and items, so they will lithe, sprint burst, and pre-run away from any proper chases, and they essentially avoid interacting with the killer altogether whilst the gens get smashed on the other side of the map. They will then also aggressively abuse anti-tunnel mechanics and perks against a lot of killers, and in a lot of cases this will carry them to a victory. Thus, they rack up a lot of wins without actually learning how to loop, how to chain loop, all the other skills that I mentioned earlier. I need to, of course, acknowledge my own bias here. I do primarily play killer, but I do play a decent amount of both roles. I bet you've heard that one before. But according to the official DBD Stats website, a third of my playtime has been spent as survivor, so a decent amount of time. And I play against good survivors a lot. And it makes me want to improve because I'm so impressed with quality survivor gameplay. And recently I have been removing certain perks like windows, which I felt like were good for me when I was a beginner survivor, but I want to improve, and as a result I feel like I'm getting way better in terms of my map knowledge and understanding loops, and it can be a really rewarding role when you get good at it. But because so many survivors get carried and used to being carried by certain perks and various inbuilt crutches, when they get found out by a good or strong killer who circumvents these advantages, they get mad and they crash out. They mauled and get abusive in endgame chat, and then they take to Twitter and cry about how unfair the tactics used by the killer, and how they were entitled to that win, but they were robbed because the killer used a really bad way of playing, and that's not a nice or fun way to play for them. They act like being slugged or tunneled is something personal, something happening to them in real life, when in fact it's a tactic in a game where your opponent, the killer, has no teammates. He is trying to manage 4 of you at the same time. It is these type of survivors who are cheering on these ridiculous changes, and mocking anyone who even disagrees with them, claiming that killer players need to get good, despite the fact it is their role that is getting handheld. These made-up survivor rules of etiquette are jokingly called the survivor rulebook within the community, a narrow restrictive view of etiquette in which they want killers to play. No slugging, even if it's tactical. No tunneling someone out, even if you are at 1 gens and you've already hooked other people in between. You are expected to 12 hook everyone and then get teabagged at the gate and mocked in the endgame chat. This survivor rulebook was the blueprint for the suggested changes for 9.2.0, and I cannot understand why BHVR has decided to adopt this bizarre set of etiquette rules. And let us hope that when they come back in the next PTB, they reflect on all the feedback and we see something that's a little healthier for both sides. Now, having played the PTB, I don't think these changes need to be scrapped entirely. I actually think some of it's quite fun. It's just that zero consideration has been given to current match progress, as I mentioned earlier. And I also can't help but feel when we go up against live and some real strong groups of Survivor, this will feel even worse. When playing the PTB as killer, I did get the gen block once, and so that's the point of the game where I'm not actually able to regress the gens anymore. I moried someone at 4 gens and I had a lot of hooks, and so I think it makes sense at this point in the game, taking everything into account, the amount of hooks I have, the amount of gens they have, it makes sense for the survivors to get help. Happy for them to get the 25 and I can't regress. Totally fair, it's a 3-on-1 at that point, and a couple more of them are on death hook. Makes sense. But what if I was Hag and I had 4 hooks and I was at 1 gen? Why should I be punished for trying to tunnel out a survivor at this stage in the game to try and bring back the game? On Twitter, and ahead of these PTB, the devs were quick and quite cheeky to remind us that the T in PTB stands for test. Wow, thank you, we didn't know that. But this cheeky and condescending remark doesn't fly for a number of reasons. Firstly, because at the last PTB, as I mentioned earlier, The community flagged a number of issues surrounding the fog vials, the clown, and bugs. Yet all of these issues were completely ignored, and it got shipped to live as is, bugs and all. And they were fixed later down the line when we complained again. Why not just fix it after the PTB when we gave you feedback? So maybe stow the sarcasm behaviour. Given you have a track record of letting us test things, give us feedback, and then utterly ignore us. This isn't helped by big creators in this space running defence for them and giving them this same excuse. Secondly, the sass in this tweet is unhelpful because we understand that we can change things and tweak them. We get that. But why the have these changes got to this stage in the first place? It is wildly concerning to me that the devs have spent time and decided that these changes are remotely even near balanced. It is so overboard, these changes, that I really question the mindset of the developers at BHVR. It is often joked about in the community that the devs do not play their own game, but I do genuinely need to question, do they? Beyond playing custom games in the office for testing, have they even played a normal public game of Dead by Daylight as killer against competent survivors? Have they played a game as a mid-tier or low-tier killer against survivors who are doing everything to win? Because these changes would suggest that they don't. And I thought this is what the consultant program was for. We have great consultants on your roster like Hens, who has an incredible knowledge and understanding of the game. And if you ran these by these types of content creators at this early stage, they would tell you these issues. I just don't understand why you're not referring to your consultants, why you're not consulting with them. It baffles me when you've got such great knowledge at your disposal like Hens. It confuses me greatly. There are so many situations, specific scenarios, where good survivors could use these changes to their advantage when they're already smashing the killer. At this stage, these changes are not protecting lower MMR survivors or assisting games where they are struggling. It's just making the higher brackets of play even more lopsided. And I know that good survivors do not agree with these changes. I've seen them speaking out because they do not need them to win. They don't need them to outplay killers because they're already good enough. It's genuinely been great to see that so many quality survivor mains are also calling out these changes. But unfortunately, I fear that these voices will be drowned out by the more toxic portion of the player base that play Survivor and want to be coddled and want to be handed their victory. Now, there are things in this update which I actually personally like, having played them a bit. Giving killers incentives to spread hooks is a good thing. The carrot approach is far better than the stick. Encouraging both sides to play in a healthier way is the best way to go in my opinion. And I did find it enjoyable in the PTB trying to use these benefits to my advantage, looking out for that short barbecue and chili, trying to pop a gen. It was good fun. It's just that these incentives are a drop in the ocean compared to the massive benefits and advantage survivors are getting. The haste benefit is negligible and pointless for so many killers. The improved gen damage I think is quite good, but it's situational. There's going to be times when you're defending an area of the map or you're on another side of the map and you need to then follow up on an immediate chase and you're just not going to be able to take advantage of it. So it's incredibly situational. And again, all these mainly benefit high level killers, high mobility killers who can follow up on that barbecue and chili, who can move to the other side of the map and hit that pop. I'm unsure how a hag who has a web on one side of the map is supposed to use the barbecue and chili to any meaningful extent except for some general information. None of this is to mention the disinformation that killers will now be fed on their HUD, while survivors get 3 second chance perks as base kit. Again, all of this just needs to be tweaked. There needs to be conditions. A lot of these benefits that survivors get need to be deactivated when the generators are done to a certain amount, and some just need to, quite frankly, go. Again, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of my suggestions. I'm going to leave it to the likes of Pixel Bush, who I know is going to release a video soon. But I'm here more to discuss why the community has let this happen, the community responsibility on holding BHVR accountable. As it stands, these changes are just flat benefits for survivors and new rules for killers to follow, lest they be punished for playing in a tactical and reactive way. And I think this could be the worst part of the update. To massage the ego of certain bad toxic survivors and make them feel better, BHVR are essentially changing the entire game. They are essentially deleting the sandbox nature of each match. Every game now has to have the same flow. You chase one survivor, hook them, then move to the other side of the map, chase the next, over and over again. Macro gameplay, map control, and tactics be damned. It's boring. Instead of incentivizing both sides to play in a healthier way, or encourage players to get more skilled at advanced strategies, we are railroading the game into the most boring state imaginable. The game's tutorial has no advanced segments for Survivor, and instead of improving this onboarding system and introducing survivors to advanced techniques, we'd rather sugarcoat their experience instead of encouraging them to learn advanced techniques as Survivor. Because why should they even bother going out their way to learn these techniques when behaviour A, don't teach them how, and B, they don't need them because there's so many protections in place. At least there would be if these updates went through as are. Dead by Daylight is an asymmetric game. The killer is facing 4 people simultaneously. He isn't just chasing survivors around a map, he's controlling the map. The advantage of the survivor team is their numbers, their ability to assist and multitask. These new updates reduce the need for them to have teammates. More players can do things themselves. They can pick themselves up, escape a tunnel without the need for a survivor to assist and take hits. It isn't 1v4 anymore. It's a bunch of back-to-back one-on-ones that just so happen to take place on a shared map. Survivors have their teamwork, and killers need to control the macro flow of the map. That's the beauty of this game and of both roles. This update threatens to stifle this element of the game, and no one who is objective can genuinely like these changes as they are. Anyone who is an entitled survivor who just wants an unfair advantage, or a content creator who is too afraid to say how they really feel without cushioning the blow. I guess that's what I wanted to say in this video. This is a bad direction for the game, as it seems as though behaviour are catering to the most entitled part of the fanbase, and as a result are erasing skill expression and the macro elements of each game. This portion of the player base shout at anyone who disagrees and praise behaviour for these types of updates, and they are wrong. They are also enabled by the noticeable silence or even direct support from certain content creators within this space. Some run defense for behaviour, or some say nothing at all or redirect attention elsewhere. I understand you want to preserve your relationship with behaviour, but giving well-formulated criticism when it's warranted should not result in that relationship eroding. If, like me, you do not like the direction of this PTB, then I urge you to play the PTB, take some notes, some footage, and submit feedback in a constructive and polite way via the forums, as they have tweeted that out. That is the best way to give out feedback. I've already done this. As I've noted several times throughout this video, Behaviour have already acknowledged the feedback and they are going to delay these changes to a future PTB and update. It won't be coming in 9.2.0, but that doesn't mean you still shouldn't go through the process of playing the PTB, experiencing these suggested changes for yourself, and then submitting your feedback with detailed explanations on the forums. It is still important that you let your voice be heard. It is important that you give Behaviour as much information as possible, so that when they go back to the drawing board, they're drawing on multiple sources of people suggesting tweaks and where they went wrong. The more feedback, the more we push back against how bad these changes are, the more likely the case is that we get a good update when they finally come back with some suggested changes. As I've said, I don't think everything needs to be scrapped. They can absolutely rework all of these suggested changes to make a more balanced and fair Dead by Daylight game. But you need to give them the feedback. You need to give them the information to draw upon for the next update. Please play the PTB. Please submit your feedback on the forums. I think my overall conclusion of this video isn't necessarily about the numbers or practicalities of the patch. Again, I will let more experienced voices cover why each of these changes are problematic. The point of this video was to highlight that Behaviour have essentially been getting away with an unacceptable level of incompetence and arrogance. They get away with it because the community doesn't hold them accountable enough. They are enabled by cheerleaders within the toxic portion of the community, who want the game to become more and more survivor-sided until the killers are just there in the background. and those within the content creation sphere that allow them to ignore feedback, that allow them to make sassy remarks whilst they've got no leg to stand on, that allow a PvP game to exist with this level of bugs without saying anything, are complicit in the bad direction of this game. Thankfully, this patch is so god-awful that for once it seems as though 98% of the community are on the same side, and it's great to see. BHVR are allowed to get away with this because they're the only game in this sphere, this asymmetric sphere. Because the way they're running their game, it only takes one decent asymmetric game and this house of cards will come tumbling down. And look, at the end of the day, I am far more positive now than I was when I first started making this video. I am glad that BHVR have listened and pushed this back. I'm glad that this really cool new killer, the Krasu, will not get overshadowed by any controversies, at least for now. And that means I'm just looking forward to this cool new chapter. And it makes me hopeful for this next iteration of the anti-slugging and anti-tunneling update, because so many people have given so much feedback that it can only get better from here. At least I hope. Many within the community have already taken to Twitter and YouTube to say this is not good. Add your voice to theirs. It is great to see that the community is largely in unison in saying that this patch is a bad idea. But despite what BHVR's defenders will say, letting the team know what you think, letting them know that this patch is rubbish, is not doom posting, it's not whining, it's not tiring and bringing down the positivity of the community. It is absolutely necessary. If ever there was a time for genuine criticism, the time is now. It is BHVR's job to listen to our feedback as the players of this game who financially support them. Receiving feedback, listening to it, and acting upon it in the direction that the community wants to is their job. Developing Dead by Daylight is BHVR's job, and they are failing at it. Let them know. That's it, I guess. I thought my return to this game would primarily focus on lore, but here we are. I guess I'll see you in the fog. See ya, and take care.